The goal of this video lecture is to review the symptoms of mania and hypomania and the diagnostic criteria for these two types of mood episodes. Remember that when we're thinking about mood, we're thinking about sets of interrelated patterns of emotional or affective experiences, behaviors, patterns of cognition, and physical experiences that tend to co-occur. In depressive disorders, we saw mood states that were low relative to a euthymic mood state. In contrast, our bipolar disorders are characterized by disturbances in mood that are elevated relative to a neutral or euthymic mood state. They're characterized by episodes of mania or hypomania, and this mood might be characterized by a euphoric mood state, an expansive mood state, or an irritable mood state. We're also going to see related symptoms. The key symptom for both manic and hypomanic episodes is that the mood symptom must be present. The mood state that characterizes manic or hypomanic episodes is a distinct period of abnormally and persistently elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, accompanied by abnormally and persistently increased activity or energy. Remember that mood states exist on a spectrum. Elevated mood states are normal, and so are depressed mood states. But when we see a very highly elevated mood state, meaning it's extremely high relative to a euthymic mood state, and when that abnormally high mood state persists over a period of time, that is characteristic of mania or hypomania. During a manic or a hypomanic episode, we're seeing a mood state that is noticeably elevated. We also want to be careful to compare this to an individual's baseline mood. So whatever euthymic is for that individual, we're noticing a characteristic shift from their typical mood state. This mood symptom is necessary for a diagnosis of a manic or a hypomanic episode. In addition to the characteristic elevated mood, we might also see behavioral symptoms. These are changes in behavior that are characteristic of this elevated, expansive mood state. One behavioral symptom that we might see is changes in speech. This can be characterized by pressured speech. Pressured speech is difficult to interrupt, and it's very rapid. It can seem kind of like it's being driven by a motor. You might also see increased talkativeness. And again, we're going to compare this to an individual's baseline. We know that different individuals vary in how much they talk, and they also vary in how quickly they talk. Anybody who's comparing my normal levels of speech and my rate of speech to somebody maybe from Missouri or Louisiana who speaks a little bit more slowly and is a little bit more relaxed is going to notice that my normal pace of speech and my normal volume of speech are very different. So when we're evaluating these behavioral symptoms, we always want to compare this to an individual's baseline. If an individual begins speaking really rapidly and it's hard to interrupt and they're talking a lot and that's not really normal for them, that would be potentially indicative of pressured speech. Increased talkativeness is another behavioral symptom, so talking a lot more, and again being difficult to interrupt. Talking for longer periods of time can also be a sign that an individual is having changes in their speech. Another behavioral symptom that we might see is an increase in goal-directed behavior. This might mean taking on new projects at work or at school, starting a new business, or deciding to pursue a new degree. It might also mean becoming more social, so going out a lot more frequently, staying out later than usual, or developing a lot of new friendships. There might be increases in sexual behavior, like engaging in many more sexual experiences than is normal for a person's baseline, having more sexual partners than was previously normal for that person, or spending more time pursuing sex than is typical for a person. And again, all of these are going to be evaluated relative to an individual's baseline. So you're seeing an individual who suddenly has a very noticeable increase in the kinds of behaviors that they're getting involved in, and suddenly they're making a lot of big plans. Maybe they're making plans across a lot of domains. They decide they want to move to a new city, they want to change careers, get a new job, start a new degree. They've also started new relationships with several new romantic partners. They're doing all of this simultaneously. That would be a very noticeable increase in goal-directed behavior for that person. We might also see this in terms of physical activity. So you might see a lot of psychomotor agitation, similar to what we saw with our depressive disorders. You might see a lot of physical activity, undirected or nervous energy like pacing or fidgeting, and a lot of physical movement. So both of these would be another behavioral symptom of mania or hypomania. Our last behavioral symptom is what the DSM calls excessive involvement in activities that have a high potential for painful consequences. This suggests that an individual is engaging in behaviors that are potentially negative or harmful. This might include buying sprees, meaning an individual is spending more money than is characteristic for them, or running up credit card debt. They might be using substances in a way that is not typical for them, like increasing their drinking behavior or changing their substance use to a point that they're putting themselves at risk. For example, they might be driving or going to work under the influence. They might be engaging in sexual behavior that's uncharacteristic for them, that's putting them at the potential for risk. For example, meeting new partners in unsafe ways, or engaging in sexual activities that have the potential to be physically harmful in ways that are not characteristic for an individual. So in sum, an individual is engaging in activities that might have potentially harmful consequences and may not be considering the risks of those behaviors. Our next set of symptoms are the cognitive symptoms. These are changes to thought patterns that are characteristic of manic and hypomanic episodes, and they indicate that a person's thought patterns have shifted in the context of this elevated or expansive mood. One characteristic symptom we might see is inflated self-esteem or grandiosity. In the depressive disorders, we had a tendency to see diminished self-esteem and a low sense of self-worth. During a manic or hypomanic episode, we might see the opposite. So we could see people whose self-concept becomes very high, perhaps to the point that they may even experience what we call delusions of grandeur. For example, they may believe that they have special powers, or that they are the incarnation of the Messiah or Cleopatra, or they might start to believe that they've been given a special mission. This sense of inflated self-esteem can exist on a spectrum. Sometimes when I'm assessing people, I might say, "How have you been feeling about yourself lately?" Someone with inflated self-esteem might say, "I feel fantastic. I've never been this great. I'm doing so much better than everyone else, and I just don't understand how the rest of the world functions because I am just completely on top of my game." So an individual's sense of self and self-worth is expansive and elevated compared to their typical baseline. We might see this inflated self-esteem as indicative of a shift in their cognition. Another very characteristic cognitive symptom is what's described as either racing thoughts or a flight of ideas. With the behavioral symptoms, we talked about a behavioral manifestation of this with pressured speech or increased talkativeness. This cognitive symptom is a subjective experience. A person's thoughts are going very rapidly or going from topic to topic very quickly in a way that's difficult to follow. So a person might describe this subjectively. They might say, "I can't follow my own train of thought, and I'm having all of these different thoughts go through my head." They might have ideas that jump from topic to topic very quickly that they find difficult to follow. And you might notice in their speech that they become a little tangential or dumping from idea to idea very quickly. Sometimes an individual will have insight into this and they'll be able to describe it and say that they feel like their ideas are becoming difficult to follow. Other times, an individual may not have this insight into their racing thoughts and the fact that their thought pattern is speeded up, so you might be looking for more objective indicators of this, like patterns in their speech. Our final cognitive symptom is distractibility. This can either be subjectively reported by the individual, or it might be observed. This is another symptom that we also saw with our depressive disorders. So remember that difficulty concentrating and sustaining attention was one of our symptoms of a depressive episode. We can also see difficulty sustaining attention in manic and hypomanic episodes. This distractibility is often characterized by being easily distracted by new ideas. So an individual's attention may be very easily captured by novel stimuli. They might be working on one task and then get easily sidetracked onto another task. An individual might report this distractibility. You could ask them, "Are you able to sustain attention? Can you finish things that you start?" And the individual might report, "No, I used to be pretty good at starting tasks at work and staying on task, but now I feel like I've got 10 half-started tasks, but I haven't even finished anything this week." So that would be indicative that they're more distracted than they used to be. Or it might actually be observable. You might be able to watch the individual start tasks and then not complete them. This might be evident in their speech or in trying to keep them on topic during the interview. Or you might be getting observations from family members, from coworkers, or from other people that this individual interacts with. Finally, we have our somatic symptoms, the way that a person is physiologically experiencing this elevated mood. One of the key characteristics of a manic or hypomanic episode is a decreased need for sleep. This is in contrast to insomnia, where a person is unable to sleep and finds this distressing and may feel fatigued or tired as the result of loss of sleep. Often, during a manic or a hypomanic episode, an individual is going to be sleeping less than their typical amount of sleep, but they also feel rested and have a normal or even excessive amount of energy. So someone might come in and say, "I've been sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night, but I feel really great. I don't actually need that much sleep anymore." Sometimes this can actually be one of the early signs of the onset of a manic or a hypomanic episode. So if you are a clinician treating an individual with bipolar disorder, you're often monitoring their sleep. You notice that they have a decreased need for sleep, or if they're starting to report that they're sleeping a little bit less at night, but still feel like they have a really good energy level, this can be a sign that they may be experiencing the onset of an episode of mania or hypomania, and that would be a sign for concern. So anytime that somebody comes in and reports, "I'm not sleeping a lot, I'm only sleeping a couple hours a night, but I'm feeling really good," It's a really strong indicator that you want to screen for the other symptoms of mania or hypomania, because that can be a really key symptom that could clue you in that you're seeing one of these elevated mood episodes. It could also be one of the earliest signs that tells you that you need to keep an eye out for the development of these other symptoms. Our next somatic symptom is psychomotor agitation. So similar to what we saw with the depressive disorders, this is behavioral activation. It's a lot of physical energy that's not necessarily directed at goals or goal-oriented or increased behavior. It's just nervous energy that's visible somatically. So you might see someone pacing and they might be unable to sit still, or they might be going for very long walks to get rid of this nervous energy. The individual's energy level is so high that they're unable to manage that energy without a lot of physical motion. Now that we've identified the symptoms of these mood episodes, let's discuss the diagnostic criteria for episodes of mania and hypomania. We'll start with the diagnostic criteria for a manic episode. To diagnose someone as having an episode of mania, the person needs to exhibit at least 3 or more of the symptoms that we discussed, in addition to that key mood symptom of elevated, expansive, or irritable mood. If the mood is irritable and not elevated, euphoric, or expansive, they need 4 additional symptoms. So if they have euphoric or expansive mood, they only need 3 of these additional symptoms from the behavioral, cognitive, and somatic symptoms we discussed. If they have an expansive, irritable mood, they need 4 of those additional symptoms. In addition to having these symptoms, the symptoms need to be present for at least 1 week, with one important caveat. If the symptoms are severe enough that the individual needs to be hospitalized, the duration does not need to last the full week. So if your symptoms are severe enough that you need to be hospitalized, that automatically qualifies an individual for a manic episode. But in the absence of hospitalization, the symptoms need to be present for at least 7 days. During that period, the symptoms need to be present most of the day, nearly every day. So similar to a major depressive episode, these are not transient symptoms or reactive symptoms. This is a persistent elevated mood state. Another important characteristic of mania is that the symptoms cause marked impairment in social or occupational functioning, require hospitalization, or have psychotic features. So these are severe symptoms. They're causing problems in functioning. They might be causing problems in a person's relationships. For example, maybe they're engaging in a lot of sexual activity outside of their relationship, or maybe they've quit their job and moved across the country. Maybe they're running up credit card bills and spending money that they don't have. They might be quitting projects at work to start on new projects and causing problems with their boss. So not only is the change in their behavior noticeable to others, but it's noticeable to the point that it causes impairment. Often, during a manic episode, the individual themselves will not have insight into the loss of functioning that they're experiencing. So because they're experiencing this elevated mood, elevated energy, and increased self-concept, they may feel like things are going very well. Sometimes you might get information about their functioning from friends, family members, or coworkers. Or sometimes the person might be reporting this retrospectively. When they come out of the manic episode, they might be able to report and say, I thought I felt really good while I was experiencing the symptoms, but then when I stopped being manic, there were a lot of messes in my life that I needed to clean up that I'd caused by my behavior during the manic episode. So there's impairment in functioning, hospitalization, or the presence of psychotic features. Both hospitalization and psychotic features are severe enough to automatically lead to the diagnosis of a manic episode instead of a hypomanic episode. So during a severe manic episode, a person might experience symptoms of psychosis, such as delusions or hallucinations. They might have delusions of grandeur, where their self-concept is so inflated that they start having delusional beliefs. They might be experiencing hallucinations. They might see things that aren't there or hear things that aren't there. But importantly, for a manic episode, you're only seeing these psychotic features during the elevated mood state. Once the manic episode resolves, the psychotic symptoms also resolve. If you're seeing psychotic features that persist after the mood episode ends, this suggests that another diagnosis might be more appropriate. For example, a schizophrenia spectrum disorder like schizoaffective disorder. The diagnostic criteria for a hypomanic episode are very similar as those for a manic episode. The first 2 symptoms are actually identical. The individual needs to experience a distinct period of abnormally and persistently elevated mood and increased activity or energy, and they need to display at least 3 or more symptoms in addition to that elevated mood. And again, if their elevated mood state is irritable, they need to have at least 4 of these additional symptoms. The duration criteria for an episode of hypomania is different. The symptoms need to be present for at least 4 days. Again, the symptoms need to be present most of the day, nearly every day over that 4-day period, so there's still persistent elevated mood. The symptoms are also associated with a change in functioning in that they are uncharacteristic of the individual, but they're not severe enough to cause impairment in functioning, and they're not severe enough to require hospitalization. There's also no evidence of psychotic symptoms like delusions or hallucinations. So we can see two key differences between episodes of mania and hypomania. The first is duration. The requirement for length for hypomania is shorter than that for mania. You can receive a diagnosis of a hypomanic episode after 4 days, but to meet criteria for a full manic episode, symptoms need to be present for at least a week unless the individual is hospitalized or is experiencing symptoms of psychosis. The other major difference between mania and hypomania is the severity of the symptoms. Manic episodes are severe and cause impairment in functioning. Hypomanic episodes are less severe. They're noticeable, and the change in the person's mood state and other behaviors are observable to other people, but they're not associated with a decrease in functioning. In fact, most individuals during a hypomanic episode report that their functioning is actually enhanced. They're socializing more, they're enjoying their social life, and they might even be more productive at work or at school. They really may be able to function generally at a higher level. Hypomanic episodes are generally very egosyntonic, so people enjoy hypomanic mood states, and they enjoy the expansive mood, the increased energy, and the enhanced self-esteem. All of these symptoms are generally pleasant to experience. And because hypomanic episodes don't cause problems in functioning, hypomanic episodes themselves can be very egosyntonic. In contrast, manic episodes are often egosyntonic while the individual is experiencing the manic episode, but individuals often experience a lot of distress after the manic episode ends. They experience this distress as a result of behaviors that they've engaged in or problems that they're experiencing as a result of their behavior during the manic episodes. So the key features that distinguish episodes of mania and hypomania from one another are not the symptoms themselves. They have the exact same symptoms and the exact same number of symptoms required for diagnosis. Instead, they're required by the duration of the symptoms, the severity of the symptoms, and the associated level of functional impairment.